Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
For years, the letter remained untouched inside a locked royal archive, protected by the personal seal of the late Queen. No advisor was permitted to open it. No courtier was allowed to discuss it. But 4 minutes ago, Prince William broke that seal in the presence of King Charles, and the words inside instantly changed the balance of power within the monarchy. The Queen's final instruction was unmistakable. Camilla was never to inherit the crown jewels. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood over the table as silence tightened around him. Beneath Windsor Castle, the private archive held the monarch's sensitive instructions, kept apart from ordinary palace records because they concerned the crown's future. Archivists had summoned the prince after confirming that one sealed document carried directions meant for the future king. Elizabeth had expected this moment to come. Charles watched his son unfold the first page and felt the room change. The crown jewels were not simply diamonds, crowns, and ceremonial pieces. They represented legitimacy, continuity, and the visible right to stand at the monarchy's heart. Whoever controlled them did not merely wear history. They shaped how history would remember the reign. William began reading, but his voice tightened when Camilla's name appeared. The letter denied the queen consort permanent possession, inheritance, and personal authority over the collection. It allowed ceremonial use only under strict approval. It did not permit her to claim the jewels as private property, move them into her collection, or pass them beyond the direct line of succession. Charles lowered himself into a chair. He did not interrupt. He understood that this was not a minor administrative note from his mother. It was a final judgment, written to survive her death, and strong enough to limit his own wishes as king. William turned to the second sealed page and found the restrictions sharper. Several historic pieces linked to past queens were ordered into the protection of the direct succession line. Camilla could not alter them, loan them, redesign them, display them privately, or remove them from royal custody. The private letter, a personal instruction preserved with the monarch's seal, left no room for reinterpretation. William placed both pages flat on the table and turned them toward his father. Charles read the final line, removed his glasses, and asked quietly, "Has Camilla been told?" Footsteps answered before William could speak. They moved closer through the corridor, fast. Camilla had learned that the seal was broken, and she was already coming toward the room where the Queen's final command had just been spoken aloud. The crisis was never truly about diamonds, gold, or ancient ceremonial objects. It was about belonging. For Charles, the letter threatened the woman he had spent decades defending. For Camilla, it reopened the deepest fear of her royal life, that the institution had accepted her presence, but never fully accepted her place. And for William, the Queen's command forced him to choose between preserving his father's peace and protecting the legacy he would one day inherit. William did not ask to become the judge standing between his father and the woman beside him. Yet neutrality was no longer possible. As heir, the royal figure next in line to inherit the throne, he carried responsibility for protecting the future of the institution. The Queen had placed that burden directly in his hands, knowing affection could one day collide with duty. Camilla waited alone in a nearby sitting room, gripping the arm of a chair while an aide stood silently near the door. She had spent years moving from outsider to queen consort, the title given to the wife of a reigning king. Still, the historic jewels represented something no ceremony could guarantee: acceptance from the royal women who had come before her. When the aide admitted that her name appeared several times in the letter, irritation vanished from her face. Fear replaced it. Charles stepped into the private corridor with William close behind. The king spoke first, his voice low but strained. He said his mother's judgment belonged to another era and should not be allowed to define the present reign. To him, the instruction felt like more than a restriction on jewels. It felt like a final rejection of his marriage, and the woman he had defended through years of scandal, anger, and public judgment. William answered without raising his voice. Sadness, not anger, shaped every word. He reminded his father that the Queen had deliberately sealed the letter and preserved it for a future confrontation. She had expected resistance. She had also expected the person opening it to understand that her command was meant to survive personal pressure. The letter did not challenge Camilla's marriage or remove her royal title. Instead, it separated public status from custodial authority, meaning the legal responsibility to control and protect royal property. She could wear approved pieces during Charles's reign, but she could not own them, alter them, or decide where they passed next. William then discovered the strongest protection of all. The jewels had been placed inside a succession trust, a binding arrangement that transferred oversight to the direct heir, rather than leaving control with one monarch alone. The Queen had built the order to survive even Charles's objections. Charles closed the archive folder with one hand and looked directly at his son. "Do you intend to enforce it?" William paused, then gave the answer his father feared. It was written to be enforced. The door opened before either man could continue. Camilla entered without waiting to be invited, carrying the memory of an earlier humiliation that had never truly left her. To understand why the Queen created such a severe restriction, the palace would now have to return to the ceremony where trust finally broke beyond repair. The letter did not emerge from vague suspicion or quiet dislike. It was born from one specific incident, an evening inside Buckingham Palace when a private warning was ignored in full view of the Queen. What happened during that ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes altered the future of the crown jewels. From that night forward, Elizabeth no longer questioned whether safeguards were necessary. She began deciding exactly how permanent those safeguards would become. 2 years before her death, Queen Elizabeth II approved a diplomatic reception inside Buckingham Palace. The event brought foreign guests, senior courtiers, and members of the royal family together under strict ceremonial rules. Several historic jewels were removed from secure storage for the occasion, and every piece was assigned in advance because royal jewelry was treated as national heritage, not private decoration. Camilla received permission to wear one approved necklace. The Queen gave a separate instruction that a larger diamond set remain untouched because it was reserved for the future Princess of Wales, the title traditionally held by the wife of the heir to the throne. The distinction mattered. One piece was for temporary use. The other symbolized the monarchy's next generation. Minutes before the reception, Camilla changed the arrangement. She told a royal dresser to remove the approved necklace and fasten the reserved diamond set instead. The Queen Consort argued that the larger piece better reflected her senior position beside Charles. The dresser hesitated, but the order had already been given. Elizabeth entered the preparation room and stopped. She saw the forbidden necklace around Camilla's neck, then looked toward the open velvet case on the table. The monarch did not raise her voice. She simply asked, "Who authorized this change?" Charles stepped forward before Camilla could answer. The king called it a harmless adjustment and asked his mother not to turn the evening into a confrontation. His defense changed everything. What began as a breach of instruction now felt like a direct challenge to Elizabeth's authority. The Queen moved closer and unclasped the necklace herself. She placed it carefully inside the velvet case, closed the lid, and looked at Camilla without anger. Some things are held in trust, not claimed. Camilla said nothing, but humiliation settled over her. Charles remained beside her, while Elizabeth understood that verbal warnings would never be enough. Later that night, the monarch summoned the keeper of the royal archives, the official responsible for protecting the sovereign's most sensitive records. A documented account of that meeting showed that she requested a legal framework separating ceremonial use from personal possession. Elizabeth drafted the private letter after that ceremony. She revised it twice, secured secret witnesses, and ordered it sealed until questions arose over the jewels after her death. William learned the truth during one of his final recorded conversations with his grandmother. She did not ask him to punish Camilla. She asked him to protect continuity. Back in the present, Camilla saw the date at the top of the opened letter. Her face changed instantly. She knew exactly which night had returned to condemn her. The past had entered the room, and she was no longer prepared to let the Queen's final judgment stand without a fight. When Camilla entered the archive, no aides followed her. No cameras recorded what happened. Only William, Charles, and the opened letter stood between her and the authority she believed she had earned. She did not begin with anger. She began with disbelief. But as William read the restrictions aloud, disbelief turned into humiliation, and humiliation became defiance. The confrontation that followed was not between a queen and an heir. It was between two people defending incompatible versions of the monarchy. William kept one hand beside the letter and explained that the instruction was protected by a royal trust, a legal arrangement designed to control how important property is held and passed on. That meant the order could not be dismissed as a private opinion from his grandmother. The Queen had built it to survive emotion, pressure, and even opposition from the throne. Camilla stared at him and answered with years of frustration behind every word. She had worn the crown jewels during national ceremonies, represented the monarchy before foreign leaders, and stood beside Charles through the most painful period of his reign. The Queen Consort believed those years had earned more than temporary access. She believed they had earned recognition. William refused to soften the truth. He told her, service did not create ownership. Camilla's expression hardened, and she accused him of using Elizabeth's memory to weaken her place. The prince's restraint began to crack. To him, that charge did more than attack his decision. It questioned the integrity of the woman who had trusted him with the future. Charles stepped between them before the argument could break completely. The king asked Camilla to lower her voice, but she turned on him instead. She demanded to know whether he had known about the letter before their marriage reached its present royal standing. He denied it, yet the hesitation before his answer deepened her suspicion. Camilla moved across the table and pushed the document toward William. He did not step back. He placed his palm over the broken seal and looked directly at her. "You may reject the words, but you cannot erase them." Charles flinched. For the first time, he was not hearing only his son. He was hearing the future sovereign speak with authority inside his own reign. Camilla demanded the second page, convinced it might contain a path to appeal. Instead, she found the Queen had blocked Charles from overturning the arrangement through a personal warrant, a written order issued directly by the monarch. Even the king could not simply sign the restriction away. William then read the final power granted to the heir. If custodial rules were challenged, he could remove the disputed jewels from use immediately. Camilla understood the meaning before he finished. Her access could be suspended that very day. Camilla pulled out a chair but did not sit. After several seconds, she released it, and the chair rolled backward across the stone floor. Charles broke the silence. He ordered everyone to leave except William. Once the door closed behind Camilla, father and son were left to decide which carried greater authority, the wishes of the reigning monarch or the command of the Queen who came before him. Charles still wore the crown, but the letter had been designed for the exact moment when a king might attempt to ignore it. Every paragraph narrowed his options. Every signature strengthened William's position. What appeared to be a family dispute was becoming a struggle over royal custody, inheritance, and the limits of personal power. Yet behind the legal language stood something painfully human, a son watching his father search for a way around their family's final promise. Charles remained beside the table after Camilla left, reading the same lines again and again. The Queen had placed the restricted jewels inside a hereditary collection, meaning they belonged to the crown across generations rather than to any individual royal. That single decision prevented the king from giving them permanently to his wife, no matter how strongly he believed she deserved them. William pointed to the signatures beneath the final clause. Oversight had been divided between the monarch, the heir, and the keeper of the royal collection, the official responsible for protecting historic royal objects. Any disputed transfer required agreement from all three. In practice, that gave the prince the power to stop an attempt before a single jewel changed hands. Charles turned on his son. He insisted that denying Camilla publicly would humiliate her and weaken the unity of his reign. The king had spent years defending their marriage, and now his mother's command threatened to make that struggle look unfinished. William answered that ignoring the letter would create another humiliation, one aimed directly at Elizabeth's memory. Charles asked whether his son understood how exhausting it was to defend one person against an entire institution. William did not answer quickly. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. He said he understood protection, but protection could not include taking what had never belonged to them. Charles walked to the far end of the archive and stopped beneath a framed photograph of his mother. He placed one hand against the table below it, caught between grief and resentment. Elizabeth was gone, yet her authority still filled the room. William then found a handwritten clause, giving him responsibility for deciding which jewels were dynastic, which were personal, and which must pass to the future queen through the direct line of succession. One object was named without ambiguity, a historic diamond crown. Camilla, expected to wear at a future state ceremony, was reserved for Catherine. Charles returned to the table, took a pen, and began drafting a temporary authorization. For several seconds, it appeared he might challenge the order. Then he read the final paragraph again, and placed the pen down without signing. The king agreed not to overturn the arrangement immediately, but he refused to announce his compliance. William warned that silence carried its own danger. The jewelry staff had to be informed before another request created a public breach. An urgent message arrived before either man could continue. Camilla had already ordered 3 restricted pieces prepared for an upcoming palace banquet. The letter had barely been opened, yet she was already testing whether its power existed only on paper, or whether William would enforce it before the entire royal household. By the time William reached the royal jewelry room, the velvet cases were already open. Camilla's selected pieces had been inspected, polished, and placed beneath the white lights for final approval. Her staff believed the banquet preparations were routine. They did not know that every diamond before them had become evidence of a broken boundary. William entered carrying the Queen's letter, dismissed the room, and issued an instruction no one expected to hear during his father's reign. William looked down at the 3 items prepared for the banquet: a diamond necklace, a ceremonial brooch, and the historic crown reserved for Catherine. The royal jewelry room, where valuable pieces are examined and prepared for official use, operated under strict palace procedures. None of the staff knew that the newly opened letter had given the prince direct authority over disputed jewels. The future king ordered every case closed and returned to secure storage. He also suspended further requests from Camilla's household until the full collection could be reviewed. The decision landed like a blow. A senior dresser stepped forward and protested that the queen consort had already approved her wardrobe for the banquet. William did not move. He answered that clothing approval could not override dynastic custody, the legal duty to protect royal property for future generations. The dresser fell silent, but the warning had come too late. Camilla entered moments later and saw the crown being lowered back into its case. Color drained from her face. She ordered the staff to leave, yet the prince told them to remain. This instruction, he said, had to be witnessed. No one in the room would later claim the decision had been misunderstood. Camilla's humiliation hardened into cold anger. She removed the brooch already pinned to her clothing and placed it sharply on the table. Then she asked William whether he intended to strip away every symbol she had earned through years of service beside Charles. William answered with another revelation. The inventory review had uncovered 2 historic jewels moved into her private dressing collection without permanent authorization. Those pieces had never become personal property. They remained part of the Crown's protected holdings. Camilla stared at him as he gave her 24 hours to return them. Failure to comply would trigger a formal custodial notice, an official written demand signed by the heir and the keeper of the royal collection. Such a notice would turn a family conflict into a recorded institutional breach. Charles appeared in the doorway before she could respond. Camilla turned toward him, waiting for support. The king looked at the cases, then at his wife. After a long pause, he lowered his eyes. That silence confirmed everything. Later that evening, Camilla sent William a private message through a secure palace channel. She asked him to meet her alone, without Charles, without advisors, and without the Queen's letter between them. The public symbols had been taken from her reach, but the private conversation she now demanded would decide whether resentment hardened into war or finally gave way to truth. The next meeting did not take place in an archive or a stateroom. Camilla chose a small private library where no ceremonial portraits watched from the walls. She arrived without jewelry and asked William to come alone. For the first time since the letter was opened, neither of them spoke as queen or heir. They spoke as 2 people shaped by the same family, carrying different wounds, and standing beneath the judgment of a woman who was no longer there to explain herself. Camilla began without accusation. She admitted that the legal structure of the letter could not be defeated, and that another confrontation would change nothing. The private library mattered because it removed the usual palace barriers: no aides, no advisors, and no official record shaping every sentence. She wanted only to understand why William had accepted the order so quickly and never tried to defend her. William answered with the warning his grandmother had once given him during a recorded private conversation. She had prepared him for moments when family loyalty and royal responsibility would collide. The prince said Elizabeth believed hesitation could damage both, because delay allowed personal pressure to become institutional weakness. Camilla looked down at her empty hands. She admitted the jewels had never felt like decoration. To her, they were proof that decades of rejection had finally ended. Losing them felt like being told that her acceptance remained conditional and could be withdrawn the moment the past returned. William listened, but he did not retreat. He told her that Catherine had also lived under judgment, criticism, and impossible expectations. Yet the princess had never treated royal objects as proof of personal worth. The comparison wounded Camilla, but it forced her to face the line between service and possession. Camilla then asked the question she had carried for years: did she ever forgive me? William did not offer false comfort. He said the Queen had accepted her role beside Charles, but she had never forgotten the night her instruction was deliberately ignored. Elizabeth had not written the letter to destroy Camilla. She had written it because trust, once broken, needed protection stronger than promises. William then revealed the one act of mercy hidden inside the document. Camilla could continue wearing selected pieces during Charles's reign if she formally recognized that they belonged to the crown and would pass untouched to the next generation. The arrangement did not erase her position. It defined it. She could serve beside the king, but she could not turn temporary access into permanent inheritance. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed a small key. It opened her private jewelry cabinet. She placed it in William's hand and agreed to return the 2 disputed pieces voluntarily. William promised the return would be handled quietly, without public humiliation. For the first time, she saw his decision not as revenge, but as a boundary he could not abandon. Their peace survived only a few hours. Beyond the palace gates, news of the letter had begun to spread, and a private settlement was about to become a national judgment. At sunrise, the private letter became public history. News screens flashed the same words across Britain: Queen's final order. Camilla denied control of crown jewels. Within an hour, Reporters filled the pavement outside Buckingham Palace. Royal commentators abandoned their scheduled broadcasts, and crowds gathered beneath the gates. Yet one image captured the national mood more powerfully than any debate. A newspaper held silently above the crowd, Queen Elizabeth's portrait beside the sentence William had been forced to enforce. Palace communications moved quickly, but revealed little. Officials confirmed the existence of a custodial instruction, meaning a formal order controlling how royal property must be protected and passed on. They refused to release the Queen's full wording. That silence only deepened the fascination, because the country now knew enough to understand the scale of the conflict, but not enough to stop imagining what else the letter contained. Broadcasters turned the story into a national argument. One side framed it as a test of whether royal objects belonged to individuals. The other treated it as a defense of continuity across generations. The jewels were no longer decoration. They had become symbols of who could claim the past and who was merely trusted to carry it for a time. Outside Buckingham Palace, an elderly woman raised the morning edition of the London Chronicle above her head. Its front page showed Elizabeth wearing the historic diamond crown beneath 3 words, "Her last command." The surrounding crowd fell silent. Then several people began applauding. The moment spread across live television and became the defining image of the day. Camilla watched the coverage alone from Clarence House. Supporters called the restriction a final humiliation against a woman who had served beside Charles through years of pressure. Critics answered that service never created ownership. When the applause began beneath the Queen's photograph, the Queen consort switched off the television and sat beside her unopened jewelry cabinet without speaking. The palace then released a second statement. It confirmed that the disputed pieces had already been returned voluntarily to royal custody, removing any suggestion of a forced seizure. That single detail protected Camilla from deeper public shame, but it also confirmed that William's order had been obeyed. Catherine arrived at Windsor later that morning, without wearing any major royal jewelry. Her restraint mattered. It stopped the story from becoming a personal victory, and shifted attention back toward duty, succession, and the future of the crown. William approved the final wording of the palace response. The statement declared that the late Queen's direction would be honored fully, respectfully, and without alteration. Now only Charles remained silent. The country had delivered its reaction, William had delivered his decision, and the king had to choose whether to stand beside Camilla's disappointment or his mother's final command. That evening, Charles entered the same archive where the crisis had begun. The letter remained on the table, its broken seal resting beside it. This time, the king came alone. He read his mother's words from beginning to end, not as a husband defending Camilla, and not as a monarch protecting his authority, but as a son confronting a decision he could no longer postpone. When he finally left the room, he carried a signed statement that ended the conflict completely. Charles finally accepted what the letter had been trying to protect. The crown jewels were not rewards for affection, endurance, marriage, or rank. They were inherited symbols, held temporarily by each generation. A custodial declaration, meaning a formal document that defines who may control and protect royal property, would now make that principle impossible to ignore. The king also understood that Elizabeth had not written the instruction simply to punish Camilla. She had written it to stop private relationships from changing the historic line of custody. Love could shape a family. It could not rewrite the ownership of the crown. Charles met Camilla privately and told her he would honor the letter. The queen consort looked wounded, but she did not argue. She said she understood what she was being asked to surrender. For the first time, he separated his devotion to her from the symbols of monarchy, and assured her that neither their marriage nor her public service depended upon possessing the jewels. Camilla then opened her private cabinet and removed the final 2 pieces herself. She placed them inside their cases, closed both lids, and handed them to William without ceremony. The future king accepted them quietly. He did not celebrate. He thanked her because he understood that compliance had cost her something deeply personal. Charles signed the final declaration soon afterward. The restricted jewels would remain under royal trust, a protected legal arrangement keeping them within the monarchy across generations. William would oversee their security, while Catherine would receive future ceremonial access according to the Queen's written instructions. Camilla retained permission to wear selected pieces during the king's reign. However, she formally renounced every claim of ownership, inheritance, redesign, or permanent control. The decision did not remove her from the royal family. It defined the boundary between belonging to the monarchy and possessing the crown itself. William's stand proved that the institution's future would not be governed by personal pressure. Charles's acceptance proved something equally powerful. Even a king must sometimes surrender private wishes to inherited duty. The Queen's letter was returned to its archive box, but the broken seal was not replaced. Its purpose had been fulfilled. Its command had been accepted. The jewels were secure for the next generation. The dispute ended not with Camilla defeated or William triumphant, but with every person accepting the same truth. The crown jewels belong to no individual. They belong to the monarchy, its history, and those still to come. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.